Dear Steve Sweeney, Morningstar International editor, thanks for joining us from Kurdistan today.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here again.
Thank you. So you are back to Kurdistan after your last visit, and what is the atmosphere in there? What we're gonna say? What is the updates? How it's going with the KDP positioning in there? How is the reaction from the communities? We will listen to you. We will get all the updates from Kurdistan from you.
Well, I mean, the position at the moment is that there's a huge movement here, which is trying to stop what would be a deadly and devastating civil war. As you probably are already aware, that the Kurdistan Democratic Party, led by Massoud Barzani, is beating the war drum very, very loudly, I have to say. They have mobilized thousands of Peshmerga forces into areas controlled by the PKK, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, in what somebody described to me as yesterday as pouring petrol on a fire. And Massoud Barzani himself gave a very inflammatory speech last week, where he described the PKK as an invading force and asked them to leave the Kandil Mountains area, where they have bases, but they also have a lot of popular support there. But it was this description of the PKK as invaders that really, I think, angered quite a lot of people, but also signaled the direction of travel of the KDP. Now, I think in my last interview with you, I mentioned the report that was released by the Kurdistan Regional Security Council, which turned out to be inaccurate, which said that the PKK were planning a string of attacks in the area, but really this was a pretext for war. And the mood on the street is that the people are very much opposed to this. They don't want to see what would be a deadly intra-Kurdish war. Yesterday, I was at a demonstration with the Kurdish Peace Mothers, and their underlying message was, look, we are, to remind the Peshmerga forces that we are all brothers, we are Kurdish brothers, and we don't want another war among brothers. And those are the voices that really should be heard. These are the people that have, that have lost loved ones that have been martyred in the struggle for Kurdish freedom. And what everybody is saying, look, Kurds are not the enemy. The enemy is Turkey, and people are very concerned that Massoud Barzani is allying himself with and doing the work of the Turkish state. We have to say, what do they gain from, what does the KDP gain from this war? They're bypassing the Kurdish parliament. I don't think that the Kurdish parliament has agreed to mobilize forces and agreed the march towards war, and the opposition forces here, the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan and the Goran movement and other organizations are all listening to the PKK's call from Murat Karelian, which is saying, look, we don't want war. We need to sit down and have peaceful negotiations. But there's been anti-war demonstrations across the region this week. I've attended two in Slimani. Unfortunately, the one on Monday was bizarrely attended by 61 heavily armed police officials. There were intelligence agents there, according to the organizers that I spoke to. They said that the people in plainclothes were intelligence agents that were monitoring the crowd that gathered there. And this was an anti-war demonstration. The police turned up at an anti-war demonstration with guns. So what you're seeing really is this very clear difference in ideology and very different approaches, where one side is saying very clearly that agitating for peace and calling for unity, and the other, led by Massoud Barzani, is calling for war.
So basically, you have mentioned in earlier interview as well that the KDP is working with Turkish intelligence service especially to build up an intelligence base in somewhere around Kandil area. So very short, very briefly, can you give us more information about that? What is the concerns about this?
Well, I mean, the very real concerns are that that the KDP is colluding with Turkey, and this is it's not just in Kandil. We've seen the I saw the building actually that they're planning to use as an intelligence base or military base. I mean, they're both going to be the same kind of thing, but we're seeing not just in Kandil with the build-up of forces there, and that they're kind of blaming the PKK for attacks and clashes and things that the PKK aren't really involved in. It is to try and build up this public opinion against the PKK. But we've seen it also in Şengöl with the security deal there, which the imposition of a mayor that hasn't lived in the country for 7 years, and this has been agreed by the KDP and the Iraqi central government at the behest of Turkey. I spoke to a friend in the Makmur refugee camp earlier this week, and he said that they fear an imminent attack. Last night, drones were flying above the camp. I mean, this was something that I witnessed every day, but they said that this is intensified. Aircraft were flying overhead as well. They weren't sure that it was the Turkish Air Force, but they were pretty certain that it was. And then we saw the bombing of Şengöl. So there's what we can see is happening with it in the region is that the KDP are allied with Turkey, and what they're doing is trying to split, I think, the Kurdish movement in Bashur from Rojava, and I think that's what they're trying to do and build this Sunni corridor in the contested areas. So this is all part of a bigger picture. You can't see it in isolation, but this is a struggle for Kurdish freedom. This is what's happening. The longer term plan of Turkey is the genocide of Kurds. We know this, and they want to eradicate Kurdish history. And I think the very clear message people are saying is to Barzani and the KDP is don't facilitate this. Don't remember it wasn't so long ago that 2014 when the PKK liberated Makmur from ISIS, they liberated Şengöl, that Barzani sat down with them and said you are Kurdish brothers, and this is what people want to remind him, and to avoid this devastating war.
So you already know, and you're gonna supply some materials about the UK's parliamentary group APPG's inquiry into Turkey. So can you give us updates about that as well? What do you think the Britain's government should position in that case in Kurdistan? The KDP attacks to Kurds as well. So what is the relation? In which position does Britain needs to be in that case while that inquiry goes as well?
Well, Britain's up to its neck in this. I mean, there's no doubt about that. This is, we can talk about the KDP and we can talk about Turkey, but this is driven by imperialist interests. This is driven by Britain. This is driven by America, which has an interest in the region. Obviously, we know that there are. It spent a long time, with the invasion of Iraq. It wants regime change in Syria. It wants regime change in Iran. So it will do everything that it can to facilitate that. And while it can't supply troops on the ground, it will mobilize local forces to do their dirty work for them, which is exactly what the KDP I think is doing. Now, the British government has good relations with Tayyip Erdogan. It has good relations with Barzani, but these two people are the people that are driving war across the Middle East. It's not just this isn't just in Kurdistan. This is this is a war that is destabilizing the entire region. Now, when it comes to the APPG, which is, I think, in a way that we've taken a bit of a step backwards. We've had plenty of evidence of the war crimes that have been committed by Turkey and the Turkish state, not just inside its own country, where it is where it has committed atrocities against the Kurdish people, and we've had the Permanent People's Tribunal gave its ruling on that, and it gave very clear details on exactly what had happened. The British Parliament also has a report which it produced in 2017, which detailed the same kind of things, and the attacks on democracy, the locking up of politicians from the HDP, and we've seen this is a social democratic legal political party and 16,000 of its members have been detained, 6,000 of them jailed, and 7 MPs, 200 elected officials, and so we know that the situation there is absolutely critical. But the point is, we know how bad it is, but what do we do about it? and as a British government who says that it stands up for democracy across the world, well, then it needs to stop normalizing relations with Turkey. It needs to stop selling weapons to Turkey. I met people in Kandil whose entire families had been killed and wiped out, and who's supplying the bombs? NATO and Britain. So that's an absolute must. I mean, that's the bottom line. That arms sales must be, they must stop selling weapons to Turkey. They must stop. They must, stop normalizing relations with Turkey. Stop normal relations, with Turkey, and that includes things like trade. They need to look at things like that, and stop welcoming Erdogan with open arms. So that relationship needs to be reviewed.
What is the reaction from the international community?
Well, as far as we've seen, the international community has said absolutely nothing. There's been a complete wall of silence from the international community over this. This is make no mistake, if war does break out, it's going to be absolutely devastating. Thousands of people are going to die, and it will destabilize the entire region. And the international community does have a role to play here. Of course, let's not forget that they were very keen to get involved. However, 17 years ago when they invaded Iraq, and they have a moral duty and obligation, I think, really, to speak out and to do something to make sure that war doesn't spill out. So, I mean, I would appeal to the British government to do that, to actually step in and raise their voice against war. I think really, governments are one thing, but I think it's people that actually make a difference. It's people that stop wars, and that's how we've seen with the mass mobilization of people on the streets. We've seen it here in Slimani as well, that people are taking to the streets to oppose war. So those voices need to be listened to, and we're hoping that those voices can be amplified through the anti-war movement in Britain as well. And people need to be standing up and speaking out, break the silence and stop the war.
Dear Steve Sweeney, Morningstar International editor, thanks for joining us and updating us from the Kurdistan today. We will carry on to get updates from you time by time when you have time for that. And please look after yourself, and thank you very much.
Yeah, and that's our mission at the moment, is to stop the war.
Thank you.
Thank you.